In Print Radio. In Print is a professional writers organization located in Rockford, Illinois. We're dedicated to providing resources and education off the page and on the air. Hello, I'm Bob Francis. Today, In Print member Eddie Resner sits down with writer Alice Refvik.
Welcome, Alice Refvik. Thanks for talking with us about your poetry and prose.
It's my pleasure to be here.
I was very impressed on the great variety of writing projects you've had. I've seen that you've spent a lot of time in marketing, and you've written ads and helped strategic planning with people, prepared press releases, and of course have written a lot of poetry and fiction. I think we'll start with poetry, if you don't mind. I have a quote here from Robert Frost. He said, "I have never started a poem yet whose end I knew. Writing a poem is discovery."
Well, I agree. Usually when I write a poem, I understand its concept, but it is a magic carpet ride. I never know how it will end.
Poetry and songs could be a moneymaker for a lot of people. I've got some family members that are into music, and they're trying to be songwriters, and I think writing songs is even more competitive than the literary world. Have you ever thought of songwriting when you're writing poetry?
That is something I have not ever done. Because I don't understand music as deeply as I would like to understand it, it just hasn't appealed to me.
I see you've invested some of your time in the world of academia. Spent 10 years at Harper College, a little bit of time at Roosevelt University. It seems that you wrote a lot about the Harper View magazine. That comes into the field of journalism a bit. Could you tell us a little bit about that period of your life?
Yeah, I was the editor and a feature writer for the View magazine, and it was an image-building publication. It spotlighted new programs, new academic programs, the foundation, and successful students. It attracted legislators, and often the articles were reprinted by the professors and the teachers that were interviewed.
Well, I see you've written a lot of prose. I have a part of a short story for you that you wrote. It opens with, "What do you think of the new food we're being fed, Gilda? I really miss the white wafers. Carbs or no carbs? They were crispy and delicious." "Yeah, I do too, Finny. Being a goldfish used to be so simple. All this talk about food is making me hungry, Gilda. Where's the little boy who feeds us and cleans our bowl? And where's the little girl who carries me around in the palm of her hand until her brother notices me gasping?" This seems like a cute beginning. What was the motivation for you to write this story?
It just came out of thin air. And I wrote it. I had goldfish when I was a little girl, and I always, would watch them swim around, so it just came out of thin air.
What did you do with that story? Did it get published? Did you circulate it? What's the story? No.
It was in the Schaumburg Scribes chapbook, but that's all.
Well, the final short story we have here is called Festival of the Laughing Trees. Would you mind reading some of it for us?
Festival of the Laughing Trees is a novella that's in progress. The man stood shivering, knee-deep in a snowdrift, alone in the forest. Ice crystals hung from his bushy mustache. His bloodshot eyes were half frozen. Disoriented and weak, his legs began to buckle, when a pine tree, with boughs as soft as a baby's blanket, bent down, lifted him up, and wrapped him tightly to her trunk. He slept, cradled there, growing warmer and warmer. When he awoke, she placed him gently on the ground. Alert, he read his compass and plotted his direction. Pulling his buckskin hunter's hat down tighter, he walked toward the road without questioning what had occurred. He hoped Cliff and Gus were wondering where he was. The sun was a sliver behind the hill, and it was quickly growing colder. Picking up speed, he plodded forward. Unaware, a wolf kept keen pace in the thicket until he heard a yowl. The wolf pounced on an unsuspecting rabbit, then ran with his prey locked in his jowl. The act and the sound were upsetting in so peaceful a place as night dawned. Slightly shaken, he took his thick glove off and withdrew the frosted compass from his pocket. As far as he could tell, he was 2 miles due west and 30 minutes from the cabin he and his friends were sharing. Confident, He again began walking briskly. "The fish we caught this morning will taste wonderful. I bet they're battering them right now, waiting for me, having a beer and wishing I would hurry up. Maybe guessing I'll return with the tail of the deer that escaped my bow." He chuckled. He never intended to kill a deer, overpopulated or not. One look at their beautiful brown eyes was all it took to make his aim inaccurate. Maybe, if it was the only food available, but not for sport.
You mentioned novella. I see more and more authors going in that direction. I think there's a monthly contest of sorts in November that many authors are asked to put together a 50,000-word story or so. You've got one here that reminds me of some of the basic technical rules. I think we all agree that you have to have an inciting incident in the first paragraph, or at least very, very early on in the story. Do you intentionally write for a specific audience, or are you concerned about the age of your readers, whether they're 30 or 70 years of age?
No. Part of my background includes demographic research, so once I've written, I can usually match what I've written to the audience. And I also read vociferously, so I'm aware of what each age group is reading.
Well, tell us a little bit more about your background, the schooling and the continuing education at colleges and universities, and how has it influenced your writing? I can say that when I took up creative writing, I was just immersed in continuing education at Harper College, and I took a few courses at the University of Illinois and College of Lake County. The University of Wisconsin has a wonderful Writers Institute. I see that you've been active with continuing education. How has that really influenced you lately?
Well, I dabbled in writing when I was very young, but I began to write formally in high school. And in fact, I won the Chicago Tribune Voice of Youth Award. The practical aspect of earning an income motivated me to graduate from Robert Morris University and become employed as an administrative assistant, a career that I did not enjoy, though I learned a great deal in the process. I continued to write and attend credit classes at community colleges at night, and I volunteered for every possible writing assignment that occurred until one of my bosses, mid-career, recognized my talent and gave me the opportunity to express it in a marketing role. From then on, my positions included the opportunity to write. Also, Eddie, I continued to take both credit and continuing education classes throughout my life, and I attend formal conferences. I attended one in Willamette, Oregon, and I attend workshops that are offered by local libraries and by academic institutions.
Do you meet any editors or other authors at these
Yes.
situations?
Yeah, very successful authors and editors, and they come from all different genres. I've never left any workshop without gaining some nugget of valuable information.
Well, part of continuing education seems to be participation in various writers' groups. Tell us what they do and how did you find them and how does it help your writing? And are there other groups that you're aware of?
I joined the Schomburg Scribes on a lark, and it proved to be one of the most valuable experiences of my writing career because the writers there critique your work, which is read out loud. And reading out loud identifies most of the problems within any piece. I also belong to the Bartlett Writers Group and to other larger local and national writing associations. I think they're very valuable both for the critique and for the camaraderie.
I have picked up a little bit of education at these groups, whether it has to do with developing a good hook or having enough conflict in the story. Character development is very important. And because of my original career, I didn't have too much exposure at using good grammar, so I found that editing is very, very important. And I know there's different types of editing. Since you also devote a lot of your time to editing, what can you tell us about your approach to helping an author and their work of fiction?
I think the first thing that I do is I read it from a technical point of view. I do an editorial review. And then I can suggest to the writer whether they need it to be developmentally edited, that is, worked on in cooperation with another writer, or whether it simply needs copy editing, which would be grammar and sentence structure, or if it simply needs to be proofread. Writers are so close to the books they write that they sometimes miss transitions or bridges, and a character may have brown hair in one scene and blonde hair in another. Those are the kinds of things I catch to help a writer publish.
What do you think about using slang and various ethnic accents? I know that markers are very important. In my story, I have a big challenge, which is what I always try to do. I try to make life a little harder for me than I really should. And I have 3 characters of different ages, all with the same name, so I have to give them markers like character number 1 smokes Chesterfield cigarettes, character number 2 smokes Lucky Strike cigarettes, and character number 3 smokes Marlboros. One wears a white shirt rolled up in the sleeves, another guy wears a denim shirt, and then the third always wears short sleeve shirts. Do you help your authors with items such as that to make it easier for the reader to follow the character?
Yes, and I think that's a great technique that you employ. An identifiable characteristic allows the reader to constantly know who you're writing about without going backward.
Joe Conrad wrote a book that I read early on, and he seems to have given writer wannabes a good guideline on the minimum standards for novels. Of course, you have to have a protagonist and an antagonist. He suggests that you have mentors for your protagonists and people that guide the protagonist along through the story, and then reach some peak, that arc of building emotion and interest in the story, and then somewhat of an explanation after that peak. Are you familiar with some of those guidelines, and do you use those and advise your clients to read some of those textbooks?
Yes, I am familiar with that. That book has been interpreted in an easier way by Christopher Voigt. It's called The Writer's Journey. And I have recommended that to other writers. I think it's like all art. There is a technical foundation, and then creativity becomes the palette upon which you paint your own style.
Something that's becoming a cliche for most of us that like to write is that phrase, show, don't tell. Try to define that for our audience.
Well, for example, if you say, John is angry, you're telling me John is angry. But if you say, John stomped out of the room, you're showing that he's angry. So that show, no tell is very, very important, although narrative is sometimes essential to a story, so you have to make that decision.
We'll continue Eddie's interview with Alice right after this. We're back with more In Print Radio. Eddie Resner is sitting down with Alice Refvik.
I mentioned to a friend of mine, I just watched an interview show by Charlie Rose. He interviewed the writer of a very successful cable show called Breaking Bad. He indicated that he's very, very happy when he sees the edited version of a session, of a scene, and recognizes that he could delete a few lines of dialogue because the actor can, through his emotional talent, convey the same message to the audience rather than using words. That to me seems important in literature also, to try to develop a scene so that the reader can really place himself in that environment.
I agree with you, especially in something like a TV show or a script. It is a cooperative effort, and the actors interpret, and sometimes the dialogue can be deleted.
Now, here's something I heard recently from a professor that is promoting the idea of using more and more visual aids in his teaching techniques. He believes that that will generate new inventions and help students on the college level reach higher levels of success. What do you think about authors using pictures or diagrams or photos to convey a scene or a message that they want the reader to absorb and get, as opposed to the traditional way of writing where you basically let the reader decide how that character physically looks or how that scene really looks, as far as whether it's gritty or whether it's in a modern building. You take away a little bit of the reader's fantasy trip, if you will, but it may be something new with this digital age of adding everything from links to photos to other names of books where somebody could be reading a fictitious story and just link into this geographic picture. Did you give that any thought?
Yes, I think adding images and photographs when it adds value and artfully does add value to a book You know, it has been done before. There's a classic book called The Little Prince by Antoine de Exupéry, and it uses pencil drawings basically to illustrate. I've noticed that a lot of authors shade pages within their books now and use different size fonts and use art to convey and add value to their stories.
Can you pass on any of your successful techniques you outline, or do you design your story as you go? And how much of your own life experiences or others, your friends and relatives, do you use to remember the characters?
I don't outline and I don't diagram, but I do understand the basic formulas for many genres, from children's writing to script writing, novels, poetry. I just write freely, and then I go back and I add the technical elements if they're needed. And as far as my ideas and my characters, most definitely they do come from my own experience and composites of people that I have known or observed or who struck me, even strangers. I listen to strangers' dialogue, and sometimes I create characters from that. So definitely, I know that in order to be a successful writer, you must be honest, so you cannot contrive a story.
Let's switch gears a little bit and tell us what you think about writing contests. I'll tell you a little anecdotal story of my experience. I sent in my $20 to this writing contest and was very pleased to be notified that I was a winner, and the prize was an $8 joke book.
I think writing contests are good because they challenge us to write at our best level, but that if you happen to win, it is an amazing credential when you're trying to publish or when you want the public to pay attention to you.
Literature and book selling is a business. What can you tell us about the need for any liability insurance or vetting of, let's say, fiction, not nonfiction? I understand the need for legal advice when you're writing a nonfiction story, but what do you think of an author that uses real-life people and thinly disguises those characters? The action in the book may be true and correct, but may have some illegal aspects to the real-life person's behavior, and if they read about that, they'll be unhappy, of course. Is there any exposure to a novelist writing about people or corporations? You know, maybe if a fiction writer wrote disparaging remarks about McDonald's and their food, do you think a novelist exposes him or herself to liability?
Yes, of course they do. Anytime you defame someone and they suffer loss of reputation, either personally or professionally, or loss of income, emotional pain, they have the right to sue you. So I guess it's best to obscure whenever possible, and certainly vet the facts that you use so that everything is correct.
Well, I know everybody has a right to privacy, and that may be part of the guideline a novelist can follow and not expose themselves to infringing upon somebody's privacy. Next phase of our interview here has me a little excited because I haven't had the opportunity to talk to a playwright ever. So this is a first for me, and I really would appreciate if you would tell us about your introduction into writing a play, and how did you come up with your characters, and how did the play actually get produced, and presume you had an audience.
I never foresaw myself to be a playwright. This play is the final project of an introduction to theater class that I took at Harper College. And I am a member of Arts in Bartlett. They were debuting adult theater, and they invited me to submit my play, and they chose to produce it. So that's how this happened. It was produced a couple of times, and it served as a fundraiser for them. The characters are completely out of my imagination. I wanted to set it in one setting, so that's how it's arranged.
Well, why don't you introduce us to Act 1, Scene 1, and then I'll start reading the male role, and you take it from there.
Okay, this is a conversation between two of the main characters, Wiley Love and Sadie O'Grady. Wiley Love, Cowboy Cupid, is presented on one set, Acorn Park in Chicago, Illinois. A veterinarian's office, a restaurant, and a coffee shop do business on its border. The main characters are three couples: Wiley Love, an imaginary Cowboy Cupid, and his love interest, Sadie O'Grady. Cliff and Maria, two 30-ish people who fall in love by chance, or so it seems, and their amorous dogs, Osmond and Charlotte. Act 1, Scene 1 is set in Acorn Park on a fall day. Leaves cascade to the ground, two boys throw a football back and forth, an older couple lounges on a blanket, and dog walkers pass to and fro. Cliff Wall and Maria Rose and their dogs, Osmond and Charlotte, enter. Wiley Love also enters and walks downstage. Tipping his 10-gallon hat, he speaks to the audience.
Howdy. Let me introduce myself. Wiley Love, Cowboy Cupid. Sometimes you all see me. Sometimes you all won't. Sometimes I'll masquerade. I lasso the hearts of unsuspecting people. I tie their destinies together. Some mosey together briefly, others into eternity.
Wiley Love turns and motions to Cliff and Maria. Wiley Love whirls his invisible lasso above them.
Anything they say to each other now in their attempt to continue their casual charade will be futile.
Scene 2. On the following day, Sadie O'Grady enters Acorn Park, sits on a park bench, and begins eating an apple. She holds a book, though she isn't reading, but rather staring into space. Wiley Love invisibly enters the park, and a few minutes later, Cliff and Maria call Osmond and Charlotte to their sides, exchange farewell pleasantries for far too long, and awkwardly, reluctantly leave each other.
Sadie, my lady, what are you doing?
Reading, Wiley, or trying to read, daydreaming mostly. Sadie looks around uncomfortably to see if anyone notices her talking to someone who is invisible. Can you take on a human form, Wiley? People will think I'm talking to myself. How about becoming an itinerant musician? Play your guitar for a while. Wiley saunters on stage, softly strumming a guitar. Sadie just listens and smiles. He smiles back at her, enamored. Thanks, Wiley. I love to hear you play. Sadie smiles, and then her expression becomes mildly concerned. Wiley, I saw you lasso Cliff and Maria the other day. Why would you do that? They're both committed to other people. I've seen her running in the park with a handsome young man. I think he's her husband. Cliff's wearing a wedding ring. What are you thinking, Wiley? Your antics.
Sadie, love makes the world go around. Look at you and me.
What about you and me? We're just friends. Now.
Just teasing you, Sadie. I love to see you blush. We're friends, but just friends because of the way I...
Wiley stops speaking and becomes serious, smiles lovingly, and then disappears. That was a long, bittersweet time ago, Wiley. Wiley? Where are you, Wiley? Sadie sighs and talks to herself out loud. Wiley, love, you're such a character. Come back and smile that smile that captured my soul. Throw back your head and laugh, you adorable, vanishing fantasy.
Very good. It seems to me quite a challenge to stage that, since there's an invisible character, somewhat fantasy. Tell me what you think of the director's job of the play.
The director did an excellent job of directing it, and we actually had live dogs on stage that were extremely well trained. I'm rewriting, and I may write the dogs out because that was a challenging part of it that I didn't envision.
I believe editing is becoming more and more important nowadays because of the ease for e-publishing. In the old days, there were hundreds of publishers that would use very high standards to put a novel out in the real world. Now it seems just about anybody that knows how to operate a computer can get an e-book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It takes a lot of discipline for an author to find an editor to help them through the system. Now, we talked about content editing, reorganizing and adding new material. Then, of course, there's grammar and syntax. The copy editing phase is very important. But I think a lot of people forget that you have to pay for the proofreading of the changes that an editor tells an author and reread the thing from cover to cover and check for all changes. Have you gone through that process? And if you have, how many times approximately? And how has that worked out? It seems like a very intimate relationship with two people.
It is a very intimate relationship, and that person becomes your partner. And for all the people who have successfully published that I've worked with, it's very joyful for me. But Yes, and it is costly, and copy editors and developmental editors are in high demand right now because of self-publishing.
We'll continue Eddie's interview with Alice right after this. We're back with more In Print Radio. Eddie Resner is sitting down with Alice Refvik.
Well, I'll be honest with you, I'm very, very confused. I've been looking at editors for years now, and I've received prices for a 100,000-word document as low as $400 and as high as $2,400 for the same document. I've talked to people and developed a kind of a skittish opinion about getting into that phase of editing. I've talked to one fella who just kind of had a take it or leave it attitude. He thought that he was very experienced and highly qualified, but in the course of discussions, I found some weaknesses, and I says, well, what if I found something we can both agree was an error? Do I get a discount? He says, no, my price is my price, take it or leave it. How can you reassure a stranger that you're the right person for them as an editor?
Well, you might ask for samples of other books that I've worked on, but there is a standard fee that is kind of dictated regionally by Writer's Digest and by freelance writing organizations. So the fees that you quoted there, one was too low and one was probably too high. Most of the time, editors are paid by the hour. And as far as an error that you might have found, I would think that any professional editor would have corrected it. And I don't know what they might have returned as a credit, but it certainly should have been corrected.
Are we just asking for another person's opinion, or is there something more you can relay to the audience about the value of editing and some of the details that you go through? I know that you must spend 40 or 50 hours on a typical novel, wouldn't you say?
Maybe more. It depends, because it depends on the skill of the author. I mean, some authors are very good writers, and others have the most important aspect of a novel, which is the story, but their technical ability may be less good than someone else's. So it really depends. When I work with an author, I meet with them, I listen to their desires and their intended deadline, and I ask them for a portion of their novel. When I've read that, then I can tell them what I think it needs. It could be correction of pace, flow, character development, missing bridges, transitions, copy editing, grammar, sentence structure. It could be anything. Each type of editing carries a different fee. And so I state my fee and write a letter of agreement explaining that I understand their needs, and they sign it, and then we go forward.
Well, what would you recommend for authors prior to a final editing? There are critique groups all around the northern Illinois area, and some have value, some have no value. To be quite frank, I've talked to some authors that wouldn't even think of giving their entire manuscript to somebody in a critique group before it was edited. So can you expand on the editing process a little bit? Because I do think it's so important.
You know, again, Eddie, everybody writes at a different level. So I think it's up to the author to do the best possible job before they submit it to an editor. That would be, helpful to both people. But it depends on what you expect from the critique group. The critique group could give you an overall recommendation. Are you expecting the critique group to actually correct and grammar and okay?
No, I mean, write it. I think that's the danger in the world we live in now with the ease of e-publishing, that sometimes a novice writer may think that the critique group should rewrite their story, which I think is an error. And there should be good guidelines in these critique groups that make it clear that you're not going to rewrite the story for the author. They have to suffer through the corrections if they're that out in left field.
Can I say something about critiquing? When a writer writes, they really put their heart and their mind on the paper. So I think it's really important to compliment what is good about what has been written and to very gently and constructively criticize what needs to be fixed.
Good answer. Again, because we're in this transitional world of e-publishing and traditional publishing, those authors out there that finally get through the editing process and go through either themselves or hire a computer expert to get their digital copy into the Amazon format or the Barnes & Noble format, we'll have a book out there that millions of people can find. However, there's also a million titles out there. So it would be like finding a needle in a haystack. You've had some experience in marketing. I think it's almost equally important as your editing services. Tell us a little bit about marketing strategies for your clients.
Well, there are the traditional, the press release, the appearances at libraries, and the few remaining bookstores that still exist. But I think marketing, because there are so many titles out there, in a creative way, can often render good results. For example, I edited a children's book about a hamster, and I suggested to the writer that they place that book near the hamster food in a pet store. Another book that I edited took place during Christmas, so I suggested to the editor that they choose a cover that was metallic and promote it during Christmas as a gift.
So where do we go from here? What is your next personal challenge? Is it writing or editing or marketing, or are you balancing three balls at the same time and doing a little bit of everything?
No, I think it's writing, and I'm working on the untitled novella to transform it into a one-woman play with piano interludes, and that was a suggestion from one of my fellow writers at the Schaumburg Scribes, and I'm very excited about doing it.
Well, thank you very, very much, Alice, and I hope you continue in your endeavors and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you for the opportunity, Eddie.